let's just go straight to questions. All right, let's go down to the first one. Okay. One of the questions that came through for this week. Sometimes I want to share a feeling of warmth, friendship, connection with someone, but they may not want that. How do I redirect that feeling in that case? Okay, so this is an experience that I guess many of us have had, is that there is a feeling that you're experiencing towards another person, and you're aware that they may not be able to receive the expression that you would naturally tend to give. So, what do you do with the emotion? So there's a few different options, and this list is not exhaustive, I suspect, but it's just a different way to think about it. The first is to express it according to what their needs actually are, or what their capacity is. So part of the problem that we're facing when we do this is that we have our own natural way of expressing. The feeling is filling us, and we want to express it in a particular way according to our nature, according to, if you like, our likes and dislikes. And that's the problem, is that we're expressing it in a way that suits us, but doesn't necessarily suit the other person. So the question is, how would it suit them? So the reason that they may not want that expression, it could be a purely circumstantial thing. In the moment, you can sense that they don't want it, whereas another time they might. Or it could be a temperamental thing. You know that a person has a limited capacity to receive emotion. So it's really continuing to express it, but the difference is that you're doing it in a way which does match the other person's temperament. So the question is, how do you figure out what that is? That's part of the that feeling of warmth, friendship, or connection, is that you can use that flow of attention to tune into the other person. I've used this quote from the film Lady Bird. It's a discussion between the main character and a nun. And she actually makes the point directly that love and attention might be the same thing. And we understand this from the perspective of identification. You place your attention on something means you're identifying with it. And as you do that, you become one with it. In chapter 6 of Vedanta Treatise, this one talks about the same thing. He says, how does a mother know what the baby needs? Okay, and different cries have different meanings. So the mother knows through that sense of empathy, through that sense of love or oneness. So tune in, and it's a curiosity. Just what are they experiencing? What do they need? How can they receive this? And if you're thinking about it in terms of a relationship, whether it's a friendship, a business partnership, a romantic partnership, parent-child, whatever it is, there's a relationship there as well. So one thing is to ask the question, what does that person need? Another thing is to ask, well, what does the relationship need? How can I serve that? So you're expressing it through an act of service. And sometimes the answer to that question is nothing. If the person really can't receive at that moment any kind of expression for whatever reason, then you have to be aware that that could be an answer. And if that is the answer, you can't really approach that person at all, then the question keeps coming back, because this is actually expressing it still, but it's just in a different, using a different method or in a different way. So if you've still got this feeling that it kind of feels like it wants to express, there's a pressure within you to do something with it, or you're filled with it, you can share it with others. Now, if you've recognized that the other person is not at this moment available for it, well, then who is? Now, it's a little bit tricky, of course, because as you said, the emotion is for a specific person. But this is where this quote from, again, the Vedanta Treatise comes in. He says, your home, therefore, should be the center and not the boundary of your affection. So if you can sort of make that sense of affection more, if you like, general or universal, okay, you're feeling it from one person or through a connection with one person. But I guess if you become adept at sort of playing with the emotions, it can be expressed to many. So this could be another aspect to think about it. You know, it's here. Okay, this person can't receive it. Yeah, and you've said, you know, the questioner has said, you know, they may not want it. Okay, but they may also just not be present. They could be on, you know, a different part of the country. Feeling it, you can't express it because they're not there. I'll give it to somebody else. So that sense of it's there, and to see if it can be expressed to a wider group. You know, you've been lit up with this feeling. See if you can shine it onto others in some way. And it simply means, and the one way you can understand this is that you just take that positive feeling and you deal with that person with that positive feeling. Or you deal with that group, or you deal with that situation using that positive feeling. Not the easiest thing, because it depends upon how dependent upon that person the feeling is. And it might take a little bit of management to get to a point where, okay, I'm feeling it for my friend, but I'm dealing with my parent. It's a bit weird. It doesn't make sense to give my friend's affection to my parent. But you're not doing it in that way. It's more recognizing that, yeah, use this phrase, if you're lit up by that experience or you're lit up by that emotion, then sort of let that emotion shine everywhere. And we see this in certain situations. You know, someone gets into a new romantic relationship and they are sort of, you know, got a bit of a glow on, and they're just nicer to everybody. And everyone says, you know, gee, he's in good spirits. He's been really nice this week to all of us. Why? Because he's feeling that positive warmth and glow from the other person. So that sometimes happens naturally. But again, we're talking here about redirecting. So see if you can manage it in a positive or deliberate sense. Another aspect is to reinvest it back into yourself. So what does that mean? So there's a line in the poem The Daffodils. After he has, you know, waxed lyrical about the beauty of the daffodils, continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched a never-ending line along the margin of a bay, etc. There's a line that says, I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. I gazed and gazed. So the way that that's described or interpreted by the Swami is, rather than expressing it outward, you know, continuous as the stars that shine, he was sort of just babbling, positive babbling, but babbling in the sense that it was just this stream of consciousness expression of the beauty he was experiencing. One thing is to express it outwards, but the idea of gazed and gazed is to reflect upon it. So one way to treat an emotion is to express it. Another way to treat it is to internalize it, is to leave it within. So it means that you are, when you say reinvest it back into yourself, you feel into it. You really get in tune with it and bathe in it. And rather than only feeling the enjoyment of it, just observe it and have a sense of curiosity as to what it is. So that's where the gazed and gazed aspect comes in. You're reflecting upon it, you're questioning it. So you're not bombarding it with questions and trying to pull it to pieces. The idea of questioning is just to have a sense of, just enough of a sense of curiosity to sustain your awareness on it. You don't want to completely objectify it in a sense where you no longer feel it. So you're not trying to distance yourself from it. In fact, quite the opposite. You're trying to enter into it more. We've used that example in another context of you take a white cloth, dip it into yellow dye, and dry it. It's a little bit yellow. Keep dipping it in, it gets progressively more yellow. You can think of it that way, that you're dipping yourself into the feeling. So part of the analysis or part of the questioning is what am I experiencing? And the important aspect here is that this feeling into it, this observing it, this reflecting upon it, means that you're objective to it. There's an objectivity that's coming. Again, it's not a distancing, so you stop feeling it, but it's important that when you feel a positive emotion towards someone, that it's not based in attachment and generating further attachment. So this is what happens when the mind alone is functioning. So this is where the idea of a reflective component is important. You are aware that you are feeling it. And there's a sense in which you are questioning what it is. It's a gentle sort of questioning. But once you're satisfied that it is a positive emotion, or the sort of emotion that you want to cultivate, then allowing yourself to continue to feel it is that sort of feeding it back into yourself. And then it naturally, spontaneously flows through your actions anyway. And this is true for all of us. Our emotions are always being expressed to some degree. If someone wakes up and has had a bad day, and when they go to work, people notice. Not that they're trying to let everybody know, but the emotion just naturally sort of comes out into their actions, or it guides their actions. And so that's where it is a reinvestment. Once you've expressed the emotion, there's a sense in which it is not so much exhausted, but has lost that pressure. Whereas if you are able to hold it within objectively, then it becomes part of you more, but it also has a longevity to it. And you can sort of eke out that positive emotion in different ways, continuously, throughout the day, throughout the month, throughout the whatever. So it's an important aspect of emotion management, is knowing which parts to express and when, and knowing which parts to, in a sense, keep for yourself or hold within. And that allows you to sustain a more positive emotional vibration, if you like, for a longer period of time. And the other aspect you can think of is returning it back to the source. So what does this mean? It means that if you do have a positive emotion, or an emotion, it doesn't have to be what we call a positive emotion. And in fact, as a little digression, there's another perspective from which you can say there's no such thing as a positive or a negative emotion. They're just information based on the receipt, reaction, response mechanism. And it's what we do with our emotions that is positive and negative. But it's a separate sort of issue. You're feeling this emotion, and it is a pressure. So the question might be, it needs to come out. I can't hold it. But as you've said, what am I going to do with it? Some of these other aspects might not make sense. You've always got the option to return it back to the source. Now, the word source will mean to you whatever it means. For one person, it could be material nature, the biological system. For another person, it might have a wider connotation of all of nature. Of course, for another person, it may have a notion of God. There may be a Vedanta notion of consciousness or self, whatever. It's irrelevant. But the idea is that it's something outside of the ego, something outside of the individual who is feeling the emotion. So how do you go through that, returning it back to the source? The first is a sense of gratitude. So anytime you are having a gratitude practice, you may have a journal, you may just do it as a mental practice. You might say, thank you for my home, my shelter, my family, my support, etc., whatever you're saying it for. To whom are you speaking when you offer those thanks? Well, whatever that natural feeling of whoever it is or whatever it is, that's the idea. That's the place that you're turning it back to. So you can start with a sense of gratitude, because you've noticed it's a feeling of warmth, connection, friendship, love. This is something that we want, something that we are all craving. So I've got it. Thank you. Thank you for this feeling. And it can just a simple phrase, but it carries that meaning of connecting to something outside of yourself. And it's in that connection that there's a sense of returning it back. And this is really the same as reinvesting it back into yourself. Because where is that source that you're connecting with? But it is actually, it's within you. So you are reinvesting it back into yourself. And beyond gratitude, you can continue to lengthen out the expression of gratitude into that sense of wonder. What is love? This emotion that I'm currently feeling. Well, I don't really know. It's just I can't describe it, but I know I can feel it. How am I capable of feeling this? Where does it come from? Not just this emotion, but any emotion. What's the mechanism by which I'm containing this feeling, and who's the one ultimately who is feeling it? Who's the one to whom it is delivered? You know, some of these sorts of questions that do defeat the intellect. So there's a sense of gratitude and wonder, and those sorts of reflections, and again, they're gentle reflections, they're not hard, kind of like questioning yourself, because this can disconnect you from the emotion. They're just guiding questions to get the attention flowing in a particular direction, and then the emotion sort of goes with it. So there's a few ideas there as to what to do with it. Any clarifications or other questions or thoughts?
No, these are good. These are good points. I need to think more about them. One, I guess, kind of related question is, so even if there's a feeling of like, okay, I'm really excited to serve this cause or like help, but this person or this situation doesn't necessarily need my help. Is it like a similar thing that I could apply, or is that something different?
I'm excited to serve this person or this cause.
No, yeah, this cause.
Okay, so I'm excited to serve this cause, but this cause doesn't need my help. I'd say that's something different. That's the first thing I'd say is question that conclusion. Because unless the cause is really entirely self-contained and fully 100% or 150% resourced, there's always something you can do to advance the interests of that cause. So I can't do anything to help. Could be more a lack of imagination than the truth. So that's the first thing I'd say, is just question that and maybe look from the perspective of what else does it need? Okay, what my wheelhouse is, my general things that I'm good at. Doesn't need those. It really does have. It's got 6 of me already. Where are its gaps? And okay, well, I can't do those things, but maybe I can help find someone who can. I can't do that job. I'm really not qualified. So let me be a connector. Let me reach out and find out who might be able to help with that area. So you could argue there's always something you can do.
Mm.
But if you do genuinely find yourself in a position where this cause, just doesn't need my help, then you can take that intent to serve and find a cause that does. Now, it might be similar, it might be different, but simply if someone doesn't want, or a cause or an organization doesn't want what you have to offer, what they say, tap the dust off your feet and walk to the next town. Yeah. So you're always looking to serve, but it's a great point to remember when it comes to service is there's got to be a reasonable assessment of the person or the organization or the group that you are serving. You can't just blunder on in and do stuff that you like because you want to help. You might actually even be making things worse for the situation, despite your good intentions. So yeah, it's a good question because it implies that there has been that reasonable assessment of the situation. So I don't think that's the same necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah. It's probably related, but
Okay, those were the only questions I had. Thank you.
okay. So we did get another one come through. So let's work through it. First, the other question, the reference is from Gita, chapter 3, verse 40. We are told the 3 enemies are the senses, mind, and intellect. We should control the senses, then mind and intellect. How do we control the senses? If desires are in the mind and the senses contact something, then the mind is what desires it. So are the senses not just the medium for the mind to register desire? And if that's the case, then how can the senses be controlled? Okay, so a lot of stuff here. Let's start to unpack it. First of all, let's look at the verse. The senses, mind, and intellect are said to be its seat. Veiling wisdom through these, it deludes the embodied. Therefore, O Parthasarathy, controlling first the senses, indeed, kill this sinful destroyer of knowledge and wisdom. That's what he's saying here. So the question says, we are told the 3 enemies are the senses, mind, and intellect. Not the case. The senses, mind, and intellect are not enemies. They are your equipments. They're your friend. It's who and what you are. Okay? You don't want to kill or suppress the senses, mind, and intellect. It's desire that is described as the enemy. So the reason he uses the word enemy and in this following verse he uses the word kill is because of the context in which the discussion is taking place. It's a battlefield and it's 2 warriors speaking. So they use this kind of language. So bear in mind that it's a poem and that it's using metaphor. The idea of killing your desires can take on a very negative connotation. If we wrongly apply the idea, it becomes almost like a psychological self-harm. So that's the reason he's using that kind of language. But the reason he calls it an enemy is because it keeps us away from the thing that we are searching for, which is that sense of freedom, that sense of well-being. Desire limits ourself. It keeps us bound to the world so that we can't live a life as freely as we would wish. So anything that keeps you from what you are searching for, you can think of as an enemy. It keeps us from that sense of genuine well-being. So desires can be for sensory experiences through the 5 senses. Desires can be for emotional experiences and for intellectual experiences. So that's why he says, the senses, mind, and intellect are said to be its seat. So we've got desires at all levels of the personality. But there's a difference between these three categories of desire. In the commentary to this verse, he says, since physical senses are gross compared to emotions and thoughts, one can control them more easily. So the physical body is more available to our awareness. It's more tangible to us. So in that sense, it's easier to observe. If something's easier to observe, it's going to be easier to control. If you can't see something, you can't control it, put it that way. So when it comes to the emotional and intellectual desires, because they're subtler, it's harder to see them as desires. We're more sort of embedded in them. Whereas the body is something which has a sense in which it's more apart from us. We can look at it in the mirror. Whereas you can't look at your emotions in the mirror, you sort of are your emotions to a greater extent. So that's why he says that we should control first the senses. Once we get established there, then move to the subtler desires. The question that came through is, how do we control the senses? Okay, when we use this word control, what does it mean? What is control? So there is an acronym that we have used in the past. INDIA, I-N-D-I-A. Intellect, not desire, initiates action. Okay, so that's one of the ways we can think about control. When we use the word intellect, we can think of it as a confluence of the intellect and the mind. So the other way to function is to have the intellect absent, so that when a desire is present, it naturally, spontaneously follows through as an action. Now, just reflect. If every desire that came into your mind you followed through on, what would your life be like? So just it takes a little self-awareness as to what your desires are. You take a simple example, we're talking about the level of the senses. If every sensory desire that you had that popped into your mind you followed through on, then what would your diet be like, for example? What would your consumption of various foods and alcohols and so forth be like? Probably wouldn't be what you actually do. So the natural sense in which we control the senses for our own well-being. So this is the idea of control. Control means choosing based on your own well-being, what you know to be correct for you. So how do you control the senses? Engage the intellect. What does engaging the intellect mean? Questioning. This is its basic function of the intellect, is to discriminate. So when you are experiencing a sensory or a physical desire, question it. And there's several questions down here, which again, not exhaustive, and not the only list you could create, but just provides an example. What am I being asked to contact? What does my body want? And where will it take me? How does it fit into my other goals, my ideals, and my obligations? And is it a forbidden desire? And under what circumstances is it? So someone might be, have been smoking for 20 years and they've quit. The desire for that physical sensation comes back. For them, it's absolutely forbidden, because they know once they start, they're going to get straight back into it again. And another person doesn't really smoke much. Okay, it's not great to have any cigarettes, but it's not forbidden in the same way. They're not a smoker as such. They don't have the habit. They're out with friends, someone's got one, they take it. Okay. Not the way you want to live your life necessarily, but it's not the same as another person who has that 20-year habit, that 20-year addiction. So it's more forbidden for one than it is for another. And that may change depending on circumstances. And who do I want to be? So this is the essence of control. Control doesn't mean saying no to something, it means saying yes to something. I'm not saying no to, and let's stay with, again, simple examples of food. I'm not saying no to the high fat, high sugar dessert. I'm saying yes to a feeling of well-being that comes from health. I'm saying yes to a feeling of being in control of my eating. So we talked, I think, last week about negation and assertion. You are negating one desire, let's again say for unhealthy food, but you are asserting another. So if you only negate, if you only say no to what you want, then you feel suppressed and frustrated. That energy of desire can't just be stopped, it's got to be redirected. So that's where the assertion part comes in. You're saying yes to something else. And the intellect is present. It knows that the thing you're saying yes to is more valuable than the thing you're saying no to. It can clearly discriminate. And that's where you've got to gently bring the mind along with it. I do want to be healthier. So that's where the guidance of the mind is important. Just reconnect with your goal. Not just intellectually. If you only reconnect with the goal conceptually, then the mind hasn't participated. So it takes a bit of effort, it takes a bit of time to reconnect with the goal and feel what you want to be experiencing at some point in the future. Make it real for you now. If desires are in the mind and the senses contact something, then the mind is what desires it. Yes. The desire to contact an object is in the mind. But the thing that you are envisaging contacting, you're imagining that future state or that experience is either a physical memory, an emotional memory, or an intellectual one. So the mind needs the senses in order to satisfy the desire. You want that piece of chocolate. Now you can sit and imagine eating it, unwrapping it, putting it in your tongue, letting it dissolve, the taste of it. That's not going to make you satisfied. You're not going to finish that little reflection and say, oh, now I don't need the chocolate because I've imagined eating it. No, you need the senses to satisfy the desire. So yeah, the mind is what desires it, and it needs the senses to satisfy the desire. So are the senses not just a medium for the mind to register desire? Desire is registered in the mind by the mind and intellect. How do you know you have a desire? Well, I mean, I know it's there. I can feel it. I know it. So what's registering the desire? What's registering the desire is the mind and intellect itself. That desire gets there through the senses. So the senses are the medium for the satisfaction of a sensory desire, and the senses are the medium through which that desire gets there in the first place. So you have that receipt, reaction, response mechanism. You have some sort of physical experience. There is an impression of memory, and that experience is connected to a whole bunch of things, and something may trigger it and it returns back to you. So the ripple of memory comes back, the echo of the experience comes back, and you liked it the first time, so I want that again. Then the desire has returned to you. So I wouldn't say that the senses are the medium for the mind to register desire. The mind and intellect is the medium for registering desire. The senses are there for the satisfaction of desire. And if that's the case, then how can the senses be controlled? Look to your own experience. When the senses have demanded something, have you been able to effectively say no thank you to it without a feeling of frustration or suppression? And most of us, yes, I've been successful at that. And use very simple, mundane examples. So how have you done it? well, it's exactly what we talked about, and it may or may not have been as what's the word, deliberate or conscious as this. But how can the senses be controlled is by recognizing what that desire is asking for and where it leads, and choosing something better for yourself instead. That's how they can be controlled. So when he talks about controlling the senses, when you control the senses, you are controlling desire. So you could perhaps rephrase it and says control first the sensory demands or the sensory desires. So when you actually do the control, the thing that you're looking at is the senses. But the senses are connected to the desire. So by controlling the senses, in effect, you are controlling the desire itself. It's just that catching hold of the senses is easier than it is to catch hold of the mind or the intellect, because, as I said, they're grosser, they're more tangible. Easier to observe, therefore easier to manage. Okay. Any clarifications there? Any other desires? Any other questions?
Not right now.
All right. That's it.
Thank you, Glenn. Hariom.
Thanks, everyone. Hariom.